I hereby introduce to you Mr. Michael Veazey.
This program is brought to you by the amazing FBA mentoring program. The mentoring program is there for you, whether you are just starting out or you have an existing product and you want to add another product, or you want to scale up from a few £1,000s or dollars per month up into the sort of $25,000 a month or so mark, at which point then I would probably hand you over to the 10K Collective Mastermind if you're in the UK. Is it for you if you're outside of the UK? Absolutely. I've got an American client, a British client, weirdly, but who's in Australia. I've got an Australian client in London. I've worked with people in Poland and in Ireland. So it's pretty international. This works for everybody because everyone has similar issues. If you're selling in America, if you're selling in the UK or Europe, or you're planning to sell in UK, Europe or America, I've sold in all those marketplaces and coached people and all that. So all of those people will find that this is a very, very helpful program for them. Why one-to-one mentoring? It's pretty simple, really, because isolation is a dream killer. Trying to learn something just from the raw fire hose of YouTube and podcasts and Facebook groups is going to drive you nuts. But even if you've got the structured work of a course, which I definitely would recommend. I did that myself and I work with people with my course now. I still think it's really, there's no substitute for being able to use somebody as a sounding board, and learning from somebody who's been there before can help you deal with the head trash and have clear, simple processes and hold you accountable to them. So if that sounds attractive to you, guess what? We've got an amazing deal. I very, very rarely reduce the price of my mentoring because I don't want to devalue it in the marketplace, but I'm doing it because I neglected my marketing before Christmas with the PLP, the private label process course I was creating, and I've got a tax bill coming up because I've had a successful year, but that unfortunately means I owe the government a lot of tax. So for those reasons, I need to get a cash influx, so I'm willing to lower my prices for the next 3 or 4 people. After that, it goes back to standard prices, and I will indeed put them up in future as I have done in the past. So if you're interested in exploring that, it's application only. I'm not going to hard sell you into anything. If it's not right for you, we won't work together. But many people have found it very helpful. If you want to find out more about that and see some of the testimonials from the happy people that I've worked with, amazingfba.com/mentoring, mentoring. Thank you so much for listening. Now on with the show. Hello there, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the show. This is Michael, and I'm with you to give you a little bit of feedback from my own life about a sort of reflection on communication trends and how that works for marketers, whether in e-commerce or outside of it. And certainly e-commerce, we are often have to be at the cutting edge of marketing well, because it's a competitive area. In fact, anything serious is competitive, I guess. So why Facebook Messenger is the new email for e-commerce is my simplistic title for this, but there's lots of thoughts here. So this is about reading trends to some degree, and I think trends are a very, very interesting thing. Sometimes people get overly obsessed with them, but I think sometimes it's good to read them. There's a book that I'm halfway through reading called Signals, and I can't remember who it's by. I'll pop it in the show notes, but there's sometimes we get overly analytical, other times we get overly, I'm just making a note of the book, we get overly caught up in the latest hype from some marketers. But the truth is, somewhere in between the hype, the over numerical analysis is an intuition or a sense of where things are going in certain areas, whether it be the world economy or Amazon, where that's going next, or what the big messaging or marketing channels are of the next 2 years, 5 years, even 10 years. So an interesting one. I think there's something worth putting across, if you haven't come across it before, or reminding you if you have, is the technology adoption curve. So I often consider whether I'm an early adopter, which is the people who take things on. That's the Apple iPhone users who queue up outside of the Apple headquarters whenever the iPhone 10 comes out. An early majority person, for example, I've got an iPhone 10, but I didn't buy it because it looks pretty, although it does, and that's kind of seductive. But the real reason is because my iPhone 6s Plus wasn't working very well anymore. And the reason for that is because I dropped it in the washing up whilst listening to a podcast, which is really kind of dumb, but I'm sure I'm not the only one. Apparently, lots of iPhones get dropped down toilets. It's a shameful truth, right? Now, I haven't ever done that. I try not to use the phone on the loo. It just seems uncivilized. But anyway, without getting into weird stuff. So an early majority person, a late majority would be somebody who, majority of people have adopted it. It's still mass market, but they come to it a bit later. And then the laggards are the people who are bringing up the rear. Like my mum, generally, the fact that my mum's got a Mac means that everyone's got a Mac now. The fact that my mum's ordered something precisely once on Amazon means that it's kind of totally mainstream. And of course, we know that from the statistics. 60% of all e-commerce searches online now start on Amazon, if that statistic is to be believed. But also, it's good to read statistics, but it's also good to reflect on your own life and to know of yourself, of say your mother and maybe a trendy friend, or if you've got sons or daughters, to use those as proxies, as very anecdotal evidence, but nevertheless a signal, if you like, to read where things are going. So in some ways they say you're your own best customer, and that certainly is one of those things that I'm always begging my clients, mentoring clients to do, is to really consider what needs they need that physical products would fulfill but aren't being fully met. That's always amazing. So I think it's also true for using yourself as a little proxy for the world. Look at my own activities. I'm generally an early majority kind of person with technology. I'm certainly not an early adopter. Some stuff I've been late with, but I'm also 45, so my age affects how early I am. Younger people generally be earlier adopters of technology, older people generally later. I live in London as well, in a relatively wealthy area, and generally metropolitan areas like London, New York, Paris, San Francisco, particularly because of its tech relationships, Tokyo and generally Japan, they are places where early adopters coming in. By the way, you could do worse than look for trends. If you want to look for product trends, I would still beg you to be your own best customer, but you can look in if you don't live in one of those places, or if you do, look around at the latest kind of hip trends. And if you can head over to Japan or follow Japanese culture, I would say globally they're the people who generally traditionally have seen the sort of technology trends first, and certainly it's different, but it's likely to come to the West. Anyway, that's a whole different podcast. But in terms of communication trends, email, let me just say, for example, I was early 90s in the university, so that dates me a bit. I totally ignored email. Partly, I guess I was a sort of late adopter or even laggard with technology to some degree then. I was a classical musician, so it was all about acoustic stuff. I didn't learn to use Sibelius, which is the notation program for music. I wrote music by hand, which probably would be very old-fashioned now. I did type my essays on computers, so I wasn't completely antediluvian, but I didn't use email. So that was interesting. And then email sort of became something you couldn't ignore by the early noughties when I started doing some office work, and I ended up with an email address because really I couldn't ignore it in the early 2000s or sort of late 90s. So that became a thing that eventually I couldn't ignore, but it was there for a while. Mobile or cell phones in the late 90s, I remember a specific incident, and little incidents give you a bit of an anecdote wake-up call again as a signal. I was in the late 90s at Music College in Manchester, and I got a last-minute gig because a housemate got a call from the Halley Orchestra. Name drop. My one moment of not fame, but of some really good gigs. I had a few at the end of my time there, and they needed a French horn player, and the person had come across me, the principal horn, who was needing to get somebody in, had heard me play, thought I was good, and they gave my number to the fixer, the person who fixed the orchestra. They gave my housemate a ring because they couldn't get hold of me personally. Somehow they knew that we lived together. Anyway, and that was what my flatmate called it. It's a mobile moment. So that's a kind of a thing then. It's like, okay, this is a moment where a mobile phone got you work that you would have otherwise missed. So just to give you a flavour, I personally, in the late 90s, inherited my first car. My grandfather stopped driving at that point. He actually got done for speeding offence, but it wasn't going too fast on the motor, it was going too slow. Bless him, how classic is that? And that's why I inherited my first car. And we all think fondly of our first car, at least those of us who've had cars, or maybe that's just me. But I got my first car, and then I got my first mobile a bit later, and that's interesting. So obviously I was a bit of a laggard. But anyway, let's keep going through this because I am going somewhere with this. SMS messaging in the early 2000s, once I got my phone, I started texting people. And then nowadays, it's got to the point where I have very serious conversations with my wife, including arguments occasionally via SMS. We're both very wordy people, so that can get a bit epic. Someday I should download them and print them off just for everyone's entertainment, but I probably shouldn't if I want to stay married happily. But also, I've been for years arranging music teaching or gigs or whatever, and my wife tends to run half her life via text message, including work. So that shows you where SMS messaging got from a little system developed by the engineers who were creating the cell phone networks for mobile phones or cell phones in the late 80s, early 90s, they were using it to send each other messages and actually became a massively valuable thing. In terms of my messaging, more recently, 2015 onwards, running a business, I've been very into Skype messaging, whereas I wasn't before. Friends of mine have used it for years. I guess once you're stuck at a computer, you tend to adopt things more quickly. And since 2014, with online business, I've been at a computer a lot more than I was before. And then Zoom calls since 2016 for my client calls. And then Facebook Messenger. So that was all a bit of a long rant leading up to Facebook Messenger. But what I think is important to be able to read trends in general, because I'm going to come back to that, circle back to that idea of trends in the end as well. Rather than being influenced by other people only, and it's important to keep your ear to the ground, and that podcast can help with that. But I think I was trying these days to produce more evergreen content. And the evergreen aspect to this is see trends, and though you don't have to just follow statistics, you can look at your own life and your lives of those around you, and just see things coming. Try and see things coming, not before anybody else sees it, but before the majority sees it, and majority of people in your industry specifically. So let's talk about Facebook Messenger. So I've been using it increasingly since 2015, partly because I started running the Amazing FBA Facebook group, and I now run the 10K Academy Facebook group for PLP course members, and a group for the 10K Collective Mastermind, and a group for the £1 Million Mastermind. It's getting a bit out of hand, actually, but unsurprisingly, therefore, I've generally ended up using it a lot more recently to organize groups. For example, the 10K Collective Mastermind, I moved from email as a way of reminding people about meetings all the time, really, to Facebook chat, because we can put a poll in Facebook. It's more interactive. The chat, people will say, yes, I can make it. No, I can't. It's much more interactive. And this is the key, really. It's generally become more practical. And today was a classic example as another watershed moment, which is a bit of not a mobile moment, as my flatmate would have put it back in the day in the late 90s, but a messenger moment. Just make a note of that here so that we have nice show notes. And by the way, if you want show notes, just go to amazingfba.com/blog. And I know that seems a bit counterintuitive for the podcast. If you put /podcast, it will take you to the podcast feed. So sorry about that. /blog. So amazingfba.com/blog, and you'll see the latest episodes. I can't remember which number this is going to be if you want some notes. So my messenger moment was today. So I got a text from my wife, and she's been asked by a pianist to go and play for a church service on Sunday that he can't make, and she can't make it either. So I still keep my hand in doing a bit of music work because I enjoy it. It's not my main thing these days. It's all e-commerce and Amazing FBA, but So I said yes, and then I got a forwarded text from her saying, "Oh, Mike's email doesn't seem to work. Can you forward this message to him?" And I said, "Okay. Have you got a text for him, or a text address? A mobile phone, but basically to text, or an email?" She said, "No, we just exchange messages on Messenger." And I went on Facebook and I saw, oh, sure enough, we're friends, this guy and I. And so I messaged him and said, you don't panic. I've got the message. I can send an email with the list of what we're going to play to the organizer, because she wants to print it off and put it in a physical form for people. So worth reflecting. First of all, Messenger is now becoming a tool that is becoming the first go-to for arranging work. So it's becoming not just a thing to play with, but to work with. So it's becoming a serious means of communication that people rely on. That's the first thing. The second thing to note is that email's still involved, because I'm going to email my list of what am I going to play, which I've got to go and figure out in a few minutes. And then it's going to get printed off. So there's still people there who will want to see a printed little program, which is something that people have sometimes with live music, or a sort of church service / live music. And by the way, that's probably connected with the idea of that some of them are probably older and don't probably even use electronic devices very much, and they like live music instead of pipe music, and they like, a printed program instead of something electronic. So it's not all about the new technology just shoves out the old technology, but they coexist. So as Tim Ferriss says, in general, it's not either or, but both and, right? So it's a bit more of an ambitious way of doing it. Old channels don't disappear. So because I'm going to email this music to an older, more formal person, they're going to print that out. For example, coming back to the 10K Collective Mastermind, one or two members of the 10K Collective Mastermind miss information occasionally, or don't check Facebook often, possibly because they're busy, possibly they don't even use Facebook. In one member of the group used to not even use Facebook, so I had to email them. But I need to go back to that, because one member recently just kind of missed when the February meeting was. I'd flagged it up a few times, but he's busy and people can miss things. So you need to have a belts and braces approach for really important information as well sometimes. So many people are only on one of your communication channels, or others only respond to one. So if we've got another example of the 10K Collective the £1 Million Mastermind, you've got a member who, whilst he's in the Facebook group and I have his email address, only seems to respond to SMS text messages. So that's how I got to chase him up. He's always needing chasing up about it for whatever reason. He's busy. So that's another example that sometimes there are preferred channels as well. We'll talk more about preferred channels as well, and each person's got their own preferences, including me, really. But let's talk first about the fact that old channels don't disappear. 3 connection point theory. To be connected to a person or feel connected, there's a marketing theory that says we need to see them at least 3 places or at least 3 times. So, for example, in the physical world, maybe you need to see somebody on 3 dates to feel connected with them. But there's a theory that if you go to 3 different places in one date, you feel more connected. And I suppose that's kind of true. I'm not a dating expert, so I can't really speak to that too much, but certainly for business there's old advice that you should eat at least 3 meals with somebody before considering going into a business partnership with them. And actually, funnily enough, with Rob Sleeth, we've done lots of things together and e-commerce businesses and worked together on Amazing FBA. Doubtless will continue to collaborate on things if he'll have me, because he's such a great, competent guy, wonderful man, very often consulted by some serious sellers in e-commerce. So anyway, I found a wonderful business partner, but we did indeed, I think, eat at least 3 meals together. We didn't consciously do it, but I look back, I think, yeah, we'd actually known each other through quite a few physical meetings in a mastermind we were a member of, and then also had met for meals about 3 times. So that's true. So I think in my own life I can see that's true. And in the virtual world, I think that's even more important because the connection is more tenuous and there's a lot more noise, there's a lot more distraction and other possible connections as well. So I don't have the exact stats for Amazing FBA, but I do believe there's a strong crossover between the channels, which is to say my podcast audience, my email subscribers, YouTube watchers, and Facebook group members. So I suspect many people are connected to me via at least 2, and I certainly got some evidence because the same names keep cropping up in different places. And by the way, in e-commerce, when we go on to, we call it something an Amazon business, we can fall into a very big trap of only being visible to people on Amazon, and then only when Amazon chooses to show us. And I think this is the year above all years where it's going to get more and more critical to connect with people in as many ways as you can that are off Amazon, whether that be a Facebook group, a Facebook page. Facebook groups are not a commonly used strategy for e-commerce yet, but I predict that's going to blow up this year. You heard it here first, January 2019, if you're listening, in January 2020, which just sounds insanely futuristic. 2020, I can't believe we got there already. But if you're listening to it then you can check whether I'm right, because I think that's going to be a trend. And of course, Facebook Messenger marks, I can't even say it, Facebook Messenger marketing, I think is going to really blow up as well based on where it's going. So I'll give you an example of some connections and how things overlap. I just ran a mentoring contest. You're probably listening to this when it's over. It might still just be running if we haven't hit the number of subscribers we're looking for yet. AmazingFBA.com/contest, CONTEST. But I popped a pre-roll announcement at the beginning of my podcast episodes recently about my mentoring contest, and I sent people to a certain link, AmazingFBA.com/contest. And I'm guessing you may have heard that and you may have even responded, in which case thank you, and we'll be in touch if we haven't already to let you know who won, and we'll probably have some runner-up prizes as well. I also let people know about the contest via email marketing, and the chances are quite fair that if you're listening to the podcast, you may be on my email list and have seen that. There's probably lower chances you've seen that because the relative engagement and open levels of email is a bit lower than podcasts. But both of them have produced substantial numbers of entrants to the contest. So if I ignored one at the expense of the other, I think it would have been a lot successful. And more speculative, I think possibly they may have reinforced each other. So if somebody hears about it on the podcast and then gets a couple of emails, then I suspect they're more likely to go ahead. Now, it's hard to track that, really. I'm going to try and ask people things about where did you hear about us from and that sort of thing. But it's hard to know whether if somebody originally heard about it from a podcast and then got an email reminder and they did it because of the email reminder, what are they going to put? Podcast, email, what? I don't know. But I certainly think that there is an overlap with these things. That all said, though, however, there are preferred and growing channels of communication. So Messenger is clearly becoming a gradually preferred channel for me and my clients and prospective clients, along with Skype for my team as well. And Zoom is my rock for consulting one-to-one and group calls, but that's not a kind of marketing channel. It's never going to be. It's a sort of private meeting room. So you've got to follow your own style in this stuff. And this is one reason why messenger marketing and chatbots really, when I heard about it from Paul Harvey and saw the success he was having, really resonated for me, because it is a trend for me that I've noticed in my own communications. But not every trend is for you. Not every platform will suit every person or even every business. For example, Instagram is a platform where I have a personal account from years ago because I just purely posted fairly random, I suppose you call them if you're being polite, still life photographs of just like cars and things that I'd put through Snapseed, because a mate of mine at the time was a photographer, so he put me onto it, but I've never used it commercially for anything. So I may change that, but at the moment that's not a place I understand. And Twitter was, for example, for a long time very big among marketers, and I'm sure there's somebody making millions from it in e-commerce somewhere, but I don't use it. I don't like it as a user, so I'm not going to focus on it. We do automatically send updates of new podcasts being published from Amazing FBA, and that's it for the moment. So if you're not a Facebook user or a Messenger user, maybe your business shouldn't focus on this. But even if your business as a whole is going to use it, if you're not a power user yourself, you may wish to engage somebody, or you may need to engage somebody to probably younger who's into that. So if, Paul, for example, said that he's got a younger assistant, much younger PA or VA, who's posting a bunch of stuff on Instagram to drive engagement with his chatbot, which then helps to drive engagement with his Amazon, drives traffic to his Amazon pages. And strictly speaking, I suppose it drives traffic to Amazon, and then they search and buy. But it's about ranking on Amazon anyway. So, sometimes your business can ignore something. Sometimes you need to get into it, but you can employ somebody else. And sometimes it's your thing. So good to be clear about this. And you don't have to do this. But if you are going to do this thing, the STAR principle, which I'm always banging on about because I just think it's a genius book, and I can't tell you enough about it. And we'll have a link to in the show notes about where to go to check it out. I've done a couple of podcasts about Richard Koch, and I'm sure I'm going to mention it again because I just think it's the most important message I can give you, really. But if you spot a growing market, and this is the critical thing I've been banging on about, if you believe you can be the market leader, right? And if it's not your thing, don't try and compete with people who are really passionate, because you won't do well. But if you spot a growing trend and you believe you can be the market leader, guess what you can do? And what you should do, according to the STAR principle, is invest, invest, invest. In other words, I would say this: if Messenger is going to be the big thing and you're going to get into this, get in big time, because it is a growing trend. At the moment, according to the stats that Paul Harvey was telling me in the podcast, and we'll put a link to the show notes, but if you want to find Paul, we did an interview with him. I'm just going to double check what the podcast number is. Okay, so amazingfba.com/285. So it's episode 285 that I interviewed Paul already a while ago in sort of late 2018. And he was saying that only about 5% of businesses have any kind of chatbot or even messenger presence. Now, that is surely going to change because it's so powerful. I mean, they're getting 90% open rates, which compares to about 20% at best on email, and about 10% engagement. So if people clicking on things, whereas in emails, if you send 100 email, 20 people will open it and 1 or 2 will click on it. And that's roughly the sorts of numbers that I get in an individual email. Now, one way around that is to contact people multiple times through multiple emails, and you can increase the overall percentages, but it's still a hard going. So now really is the sweet spot time to get into and dominate messenger marketing, and specifically for e-commerce, where Paul's making it really work. So having subscribed recently, I've just started learning about seller chatbots. And rather than trying to explain in audio words what I can show you on video, I'm going to put up a video of me playing with it. I'm a very inexpert user, so you'll get a very amateur sort of view of how it starts, but it's a genuine user view from somebody who's not an expert at showing just how you can set stuff up. So if you want to see that video, just join me at amazingfba.com/FB, F as in book, F as in face, sorry, B as in book, amazingfba.com/FB. And that's where our Facebook group is, a free Facebook group for listeners and readers. And fittingly enough, that's where I'm going to tell you a little bit, or just show you my stumbling around in Paul's system. Like anything else, there is a lot that goes into good marketing that has got nothing to do with the tools and everything to do with how you use them. So imagine if somebody invented a hammer. Everyone got very excited because they've previously been, I don't know, squeezing things together with wooden little tacks or something, or just squeezing things in and really hurting their hands, or using their shoes and trashing their shoes or something. A hammer gets invented, nails and hammers gets invented. That's amazing. But guess what? If you use a hammer where you should be using a chisel or you should be using a screwdriver, you're going to mess everything up. So first of all, not every tool does everything. And secondly, you can put together a house with a hammer, or you can just, bang your thumb and have a bleeding thumb and be completely useless with it. The tool itself is, I always think, never enough. So I think that the chatbot tool and the whole messenger trend is very, very powerful. The chatbot tool is fantastic. I'm really excited about it, having fun playing with it. I'm not putting it live yet, but I will do very shortly, and I'm really looking forward to that. And it's making me feel excited again about e-commerce in a way that I haven't for 2 or 3 years, because I think it really is an edge right now. I don't think it's going to stay an edge for that long, so I do think it's time to get into it and learn it. But also, without rushing into it, the more I've listened to a couple of podcasts about the chatbot thing, the more I've realized that you've really got to think through what you're doing and have a clear strategy for why you're engaging with people and what you're trying to achieve, and just make sure you don't just spam the hell out of them, just like email marketing done badly or anything else. Cold call phones, and the phone has been around since the 1890s. It's still a viable technology for marketing, but it has to be used well. So like anything else, you've got to have a strategy and a plan as well as the tool. But nevertheless, I am very excited about it. And I'll be talking another podcast about the strategy for communication, because I think that's critical. And particularly for e-commerce, again, if you're just on Amazon and you don't have any off-Amazon communication plans, I really think you're just asking to sink gradually whilst other people adopt those, because there is so much amazing juice to be had out of off-Amazon marketing. And I think Chatbot can really be part of that. But you've got to educate yourself. So you can educate yourself in a very tiny way about how Chatbot, the seller chatbot interface works on the Facebook group, amazingfba.com/FB. Thank you so much for listening. Speak to you in the next show.